Start recording.
And now, the Bible Yogi.
Hello, friends, and welcome to yet another episode of The Bible Yogi. I'm your host, Douglas Roberts, and today, a very special episode. I have with me the author of the book, the Archko Volume Revealed, Mr. Edward Elkins. And let me get him on the stage. Boof. Ta-da. Welcome to the show. Edward, good to see you.
Hello, thank you, and good to see you too.
So the first question I have is what year did you first encounter the Archko volume? And then what year did you begin your research on it?
I first was a friend of mine in the year 2002 introduced me to the Arco volume and told me that I'd find it extremely interesting read. And so then I read it, and it seemed so real and so true, and brought tears to my eyes at some points, passages inside of it, and it just and so I was like, I got to do some more research into this. And so I started looking a little bit on the internet and seeing that there was other people who thought it was real and true, and wish somebody would do some research on it. And so I thought, well, me too. So why not me? So I decided to start doing some research, but actually it took me probably about 10 years to get around to even starting to do it
So
a little
2012 or
bit.
so you started, and then how long did it take you to write the book?
About 10, 12 years.
Wow, wow. I didn't realize it was so recently published. Wow. Because the book, of course, the original book was what, 1880 or something?
87.
Yeah,
Yeah,
1887.
1887.
So, but I for one really appreciate this book because after I did my own Archko volume episode, I started doing some research into that. I wanted to find out about that Hagia Sophia Mosque in Constantinople, and I wanted to find out about the Vatican Library. And all of a sudden, I run into all these, Goodspeed said that it's discredited utterly, and I was like, really? And I was so disappointed. I was like, man. And after a few weeks, I decided, well, forget that guy. I read the portion in his silly little book. What was the name of that book? Strange New
Strange New
Gospels.
Gospel. Yeah.
And I was like, this ain't good enough. I mean, it's not enough. It's like he was mischaracterizing what was in the book, and then he was
Hmm.
arguing against his mischaracterization, you know?
Yeah.
And so I was like, this is totally bogus, but I didn't have the resources that you did. And now I've been very impressed with the amount of material you reference in your book. Um, so can we talk about that? Like, where did you do? You have a local library where you were able to look up all this stuff, or did this take you all over the world? How was the research conducted?
Mostly, I have the books at home that I have, but as you when I read about Goodspeed saying all the stuff and saying that that he was found guilty of lying in a church hearing. Okay, and I'm thought, okay, but it seems so real. How was he found guilty? And then I seen where he was talking about a guy named Quarles, who was a contemporary of Mahan's, and so I thought, hey, won't I go look up the newspaper? So my wife and I went to Missouri and went to the newspaper archive in Missouri and looked up the Boonville Topic and the Boonville Advertiser and a few other newspapers there and we found in 1885 we saw the church hearing thing, and it had both of them had an article about it, and both of them said that he was found not guilty of lying about going overseas, and like that changed everything.
Wow.
At that point, I knew Goodspeed was lying about everything. You couldn't trust anything that he said. And also, like Goodspeed said that the people that he talked to in Boonville said that Mahan had never gotten any farther than Rome, Illinois. And that was the Rome that he actually went to, not Rome, Italy. And so then there's the affidavits of General Douglas and
The captain.
Mayor McFarland, who was also a circuit court judge, and Pendleton, who at the time was the prosecuting attorney. And then he later became mayor of Boonville. Now, the interesting thing about that is Pendleton never died till 1942. And Goodspeed wrote his book, that chapter, Strange New Gospels, in 1931. So Pendleton was alive at that time, and he knew it. Goodspeed knew it from reading the Archko volume, and so he never looked him up. And so he should have looked him up but he didn't want to even mention that guy because he was still alive in 1931. As I said, he died in 1942. So he could have vouched for the whole thing because he wrote an affidavit in favor of Mahan.
So that I didn't want to go here immediately, but that's fine. Because you quoted, that was like the first thing I did was jump to the chapter where you sit there and say, all right, if you jump to this chapter, you shouldn't have done that. And I was like, he got me. But I wanted to find out like what this Goodspeed guy was all about, because all I had was the Strange New Gospels, but you went and read
Right.
his books too. And you found that this guy's not even a believer, even though he's a professor of religion, even though he did a life of Christ, a life of Paul, and even his own Bible translation. The guy clearly was not a believer in Christ.
Right. And so I found out that, well, like with Goodspeed, he he believed that the Gospels and actually, really the whole Bible was just were fake manuscripts written by uh, people unknown and posing themselves as biblical characters called pseudonymity, or they were pseudomais, and so they were false gospels and false writings. He didn't believe that Paul wrote anything. He
No.
didn't believe Peter wrote anything, or none of the gospels, nothing. So, and then I even looked into the Old Testament and found out he didn't even believe any of that. So,
Okay, Okay, on page 304 of your book, you're quoting Goodspeed, where he says, then he puts the question to them personally, but who do you say that I am? What part did they think he was to play? What place was he to take in the progress of religion? It was no mere intelligence test. He was actually consulting them. And I find that whole thing completely laughable. Like, Goodspeed is smarter than Jesus. Like, oh,
yeah.
if I had only been an apostle, I could have helped steer him in the right direction.
Yep. Yeah, he also only believed that Jesus' ministry was 6 years, or I mean, excuse me, 6 months.
Oh,
6 months he believed Jesus' ministry was. And also he was, in other places, Goodspeed was telling how terrified Jesus was that he was going to get captured and thrown into prison, and then his ministry would be over, and yeah.
and then the whole thing
So
about
he's
fasting, where it was all unintentional,
yeah.
because he was running from authorities or something. And then Goodspeed says, yeah, he turned this fast into some kind of religious exercise when in fact he was hiding from Herod or something. I was
Yep.
like, oh my goodness. I mean, to think that someone makes their career making stuff up to
Hmm.
explain away the miracles of Christ and that kind of thing, I just found it unconscionable. But let's go back
Yeah.
to the strange new gospels. Um, there was a couple of things. First of all, there was the discrediting of talking to the monk or someone named Freelandhausen.
Freelandhusen. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was trying to act like he was a librarian, or uh, chief librarian or something like that, and that he'd checked out and there was no such Freelandhusen that was a librarian in the Vatican. And I make the point that, yeah, probably is true, because he Freelandhusen was the chief of security of the
Mm.
Vatican, not chief security of the library, but chief security of the whole Vatican. And so then when uh, Weidemann had was there for a long time, he made his acquaintance and they got to be friends. And so then he gave Weidemann access to the whole Vatican library, and especially the part of ancient manuscripts. And so then he went checking through there, and that's when he found the Pilate to Tiberius manuscript. And he said he read it a couple times, but he wasn't a religious man, so he just. But how it got to Mahan was after he left Rome, he went to came to the United States after he'd been to Rome for quite a while, went out west to California, and then he was on his way back and got caught in a snowstorm. And so that's when he stopped at uh, Mahan's house and stayed there for a few days till the snow went away and stuff. And then he progressed on back to New York and then back to his home in Germany. But anyways, while he was there, he mentioned to Mahan, since he was a reverend, he thought, hey, you might be interested in this, and told him about the Pilate's writing a manuscript or writing an answer to Tiberius for what happened in Jerusalem at that time.
Right. And so in your book, you took an approach that never would have occurred to me, and which is why I'm so thankful you did all this research, because you approached everything from a totally different angle than I would have. And one of the
Hmm.
things you did was you proved through extra historical sources that the the acts of Pilate were actually
Hmm.
reported to Caesar,
Yes,
Tiberius Caesar. So you
right.
proved that those documents did in fact exist.
Yeah, by let's see, you had well, Suetonius began. If you read the 12 Caesars, you find out where Julius Caesar started that whole thing, even though he was not the first uh, Caesar. For some reason, they don't call him Caesar. I never really looked into that. But anyways, he's not called the first Caesar. But anyways, he's the one that started mandating recording the events in the empire. And so then as they created it, and then I go into where some other magistrates and things where he reported some other magistrates sent a letter to him about what was happening in their places and stuff like that. And so, if you think about it, how can you run an empire unless you have information coming back and forth? You got to keep the emperor informed. Otherwise, he doesn't know what's going on anywhere. And so those kind of things have to happen. And since in any thing of real importance, you want to make sure that the emperor knows about it because, like in this case, if you have the Pharisees and the Sadducees saying this and that happened and whatever and giving their version, you want to make sure that you got your version of what happened, and you don't want him to find out and say, "Hey, why didn't you tell me about this?" And so different governors of different areas of the empire uh, it would be a very bad thing if something important happened and the emperor wasn't aware of it because it could be your job or maybe your head.
Now,
And so,
you made a great point about. Now, it was Tiberius who kind of went a little bit crazy and started killing all of his uh, close family. Is that right?
yes, yeah, it was Tiberius.
And so that was because of the insurrection by Sejanus.
Well, it wasn't really an insurrection. What it was Tiberius, he came into power in 14 AD. By 26 AD, he decided that he didn't want to he was tiring of the whole thing. And so this Sejanus guy, he put him in charge. Now, how he put him in charge was Strabo was the head of the Praetorian Guard, and Tiberius and Strabo were real close friends. And so his son, which was Sejanus, had also become really close with him, and so he really started trusting him and having him like as co-emperor while he was there. And then when he decided, okay, I'm kind of tiring of this. Here, I'll let you run things. Just keep me informed. I'm going to go to the Isle of Capri. And so he went to the Isle of Capri. Well, while he was there, Sejanus started, after a while, undermining him and deciding he was going to get rid of Tiberius and then he be the emperor. And when word got to Tiberius about it, then he said, "Hey, make way in Rome. I'm going to come back and honor Sejanus for all the great things he's done." And it was a real sophisticated ruse so that nobody was even aware of what was going on. Then when he came back, then that's when he nailed Sejanus and had him executed
So you
in
use
31 AD.
right. So you use that as the backdrop to help support some of the feelings and statements that Pilate made when he was discussing the crucifixion and then the resurrection in his report to Caesar.
Correct. If you in the Bible you see that Pilate kept backing Jesus. He kept saying, "Why? What evil has he done?" And he kept sticking up for Jesus. And then after a while, they wouldn't give up, okay, because they brought charges of blasphemy against Jesus, and that's all it was. And he said he hadn't done anything wrong. So then he decided, okay, if I have him whipped a few times, maybe that'll satisfy the crowd, a little bit of blood. So he does that, and he comes back, and then they're wanting him crucified. And so and he's not willing to do it. So then, you can kind of see the Pharisees and Sadducees kind of huddling together, like they put all this effort to get this far. They can't give up now. And so they're thinking, what do we do? What do we do? Well, they decide political charges and say that Jesus was being seditious and that Pilate was not a friend of Caesar's.
Right,
And
right.
so then when they did that, then Pilate's thinking, oh, 2 years ago, Sejanus was executed, and then his family, and then Tiberius started executing his own family who had not informed him of what was going on, and then anyone who was connected to Sejanus. Well, in 26 AD is when Sejanus was the emperor, in uh, when he put him in charge, and it's also the same year that Pilate became governor of
Israel
Jerusalem,
or
of
Jerusalem.
Israel. Yeah, and so he's in Jerusalem as the governor, and so now how that came about, I don't know. Was it Tiberius sent him there, or was it Sejanus that sent him there, or was it the Senate that sent him there? Don't know exactly, but anyways, from that point on, since Tiberius was in Capri, he had to have constant communication with Sejanus. And so I think Pilate was like, uh-oh, what if he decides, if they say all this stuff and and he's in 33 AD is when most of the massacre was going on as far as Tiberius really started getting into wiping out people.
Right, so that
And
timing
so
is perfect.
yeah. And so he's thinking if they do that, he might come after my head. So, okay, go ahead and crucify him. So that's why you see the turning of events with Pilate, where he was backing him and acting almost like his lawyer to some degree, because he was saying, you guys aren't even going about this the right way.
Yeah, well,
And
Rome was well known for its sense of justice at the height of its empire. It was not the Wild West per se. That they did have a lot of order and a lot of good Western values in their country or their empire, which is why it was so huge. So
yeah,
yeah, I get your points totally. So
so then
once they
that's when he
started saying he
decided,
makes himself out to be a king,
yeah,
now Pontius Pilate was in trouble.
yeah. And I think that's the lever that was pulled to move on to the crucifixion.
Wow, that's great stuff. Now you also mentioned something about the Gemonium stairs or whatever. Did you have a theory about that?
Well, yeah, it was kind of a cross-cultural thing. And like if you're reading some ancient document looking for authenticity, you're looking for if you see something cross cultural like that, that gives it more veracity. the Gemonian stairs is what Sejanus was thrown onto. Anybody who rebelled against the emperor was thrown on these stairs, was executed and thrown on these stairs, and then the birds would pick their till there was nothing but bone, and then they would, just throw that person in the trash.
Mm.
So they'd be laying out there for people, anybody walking by could see who it was, and remember, okay, this guy rebelled against the emperor, so you don't want to rebel against the emperor. And so he, when he was describing Jesus being dragged to execution, he mentioned that. And so that gave to Tiberius's mind, okay, relates that situation there in Rome to the situation that happened in Jerusalem. And so that is really interesting that he did that because that even gives it more veracity.
All right, you made another great point. I'm switching to a different part of your book now, but when you were describing some of the interactions that the Pharisees and Sadducees had with Jesus, where they said, are we not right to assume that you're a Samaritan and you have a demon? And you made this big case about Jesus probably did not look like a typical Jew. He probably had a different appearance. And then you grabbed some scriptures about King David having red hair. So let's talk a little bit about the interviews that Gamaliel had with the family and stuff. I found your take on that particularly interesting.
Yeah, as far as his hair, now Pilate described uh, Jesus' hair as being kind of golden, and Massalian in another manuscript described him as being also kind of as being bleached, okay, from the sun. And so that kind of gives it kind of probably another golden appearance. But anyways, the situation was that they called Jesus a Samaritan, which is a half breed, which is half Jew, half something, whatever else. And also in that same chapter of John, right before of it, they said that he was born of, insinuated that he was born of fornication. Okay. So that would give the Samaritan thing. Now, how can you seem to be intelligent making that statement and not look stupid unless Jesus looks something different than his own family? Because everybody there knew Joseph and Mary and the four boys and the at least two girls. That's all we know. The four boys are mentioned by name, and then it says sisters. So sisters is plural, so that means two or more. So, anyways, he must have. And then another place, the family Gamaliel, when he was at the family's house, described the kids all looking very similar.
Hmm.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah.
if Jesus looked different than the rest of them, that would be an indication of something's a little strange here, which goes back to why they said he was born of fornication and called him a Samaritan because he didn't even look like his own family.
All right, so let me ask you this now. This is kind of a personal question, but especially for me, when I recently read the Archko volume again, it really gave me a different perception of Jesus, the man as he's walking around on earth and the way he conducted himself. Did the Archko volume change your perception of the way, Jesus was presented there in contrast to the way he was presented in the Bible?
Well, the Bible, you don't get much of his, you don't really get much anything of his younger years and his growing up. But in Hebrews, it says that he was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. And most people have this idealistic view of how Jesus grew up, and it must have been great and wonderful for Joseph and Mary because Jesus was there, and everybody's got this stereotypical, wondrous. I would say Cleaver family, if you ever saw Leave It to Beaver.
Yeah, yeah.
Some I'm sure you have, but other people, maybe younger. But anyways, it's an idealistic family where everything's great and wonderful and everything runs really smoothly. And it would figure, okay, Jesus is there, it must have ran really smoothly. But from what I was seeing was, especially when they interviewed Joseph and Mary, they seemed to have a totally different opinion of, they felt like Jesus had lost his way and he needed help from man. And Joseph was saying he just seemed like, he's lazy and of a wrong attitude. And Mary was conducting that same train of thought because they figured if he's going to be a king and rule the world, then they're thinking like we would think if we was his parents, we'd be thinking, man, you need to be out here, with a high society and trying to get to know them and the priests and getting intermingled with all them and making friends with them and all that. And here Jesus just walking around talking to poor people and different things and going here and there and seems totally unconcerned about this future prophecy. And so Joseph and Mary is like, we know what the angel told us, but it just doesn't seem we just
We don't.
kind
They
of
didn't see it. That's what's so funny.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, that struck me too. I just thought it was so funny to hear the stereotypical Jewish mother saying, "Yeah, we had high hopes for our son, but we're so disappointed in him." And they're talking
Yeah.
about Jesus.
Yeah.
I thought that was funny. Well, I'll tell you what, my Zoom meeting is telling me it's going to end me any second now. So why don't we end this conversation
Okay.
here? It's a good spot, and I'll write up some more notes, and hopefully I'll see you next week at the same time, and I'll get this thing published. How's that sound?
All righty.
So let me
Thank you
play
very
my
much.
outro, and then we'll let it go. Let's see here. Till next time,
Okay.
everybody, take care.